Knees forwards and away. Let the neck be free to let the head go forward and up, letting the spine lengthen and the back widen, separating out left and right, two spirals left and right. Knees forwards and away, separating out top and bottom. Separation. Let the neck be free to let the head go forward and up, separating out, being released from down there, the inner depths. Head forward and up, back to lengthen and widen. Knees forwards and away, pulling to the elbows and widening across the upper part of the arms as you widen the back. Those four directions are all about separation. And separation has an aspect of melting away, shantaye, in the direction of softening, especially in the direction of letting go, of clinging. So that direction, shantaye, is ultimately it's in the direction of prapanch upashama, the melting away of othering. Prapanch upashama is Nagarjuna's phrase in the dedicatory verses of MMK. The Buddha's phrase in Pali, nipapancha, in Sanskrit, nishprapancha, not othering, not objectifying anything. So when we study Asvaghosha's beautiful poetry, the meaning of the verbal root sham, which means to pacify, to calm, but also to cease, to drop off, as in dropping off body and mind. But in light of the gold mining metaphor, it also has a meaning of melting, softening. Shanta means softened, the past participle. Shanti means peace, but it also can be understood to mean a softening. So the final line in Saundarananda, Canto 16, Tadviryam Kuru Shantaye. So make an effort, Shantaye, in the direction of melting, in the direction of softening, in the direction of peace. Vinyatam viryehi, for assuredly, in effort, sarva daya, all growth. So we're interested in growth. I thought a greenhouse was a good place to talk about it. Growth in the direction of shanti, in the direction of peace, in the direction of softening. And all those elements are right there in the 8 thoughts of a great person, which I never tire of coming back to. I come back to those 8 thoughts every morning. That's why I started off with those 4. Let the neck be free, to let the head go forward and up, to let the back lengthen and widen, sending the knees forwards and away. The Alexander work, Alexander used to say, never let a day go by without coming back to those directions, coming back. And that is implicit in the gold mining metaphor with avartayaticha. First he melts it, first he melts the goldsmith melts the gold, and then brisham avartayaticha. Repeatedly, he turns it over and over again. So, particularly what's important in that is the softening, the shamayati. You have to melt the gold. The goldsmith has to melt the gold before he can turn it over. And then he can direct it into all kinds of beautiful designs. So that gold mining metaphor is rich in it kind of covers all of the 8 thoughts. So at the same time, see, the more you go over and over and over these various things the Buddha enumerated, like the 8 thoughts and the 5 strengths and the 5 powers, or 5 strengths, 5 powers. These things on the side of awakening, the teachings on the side of awakening. The more you go round and round and round with these things he enumerated, the 8 branches of the Noble Eightfold Path, with its 3 categories of Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, the 4 Alexander directions, the 8 thoughts of a great person. The more they all kind of interweave with each other. And so if I recite the 8 thoughts and think about the verses in Shikarini Mita, the ones at the end of Canto 14, which are all about separation, seclusion, they're also, on a deeper level, they're also all about melting away of othering, not othering. Paresham samsargam pariharatiya kantakamiva. He avoids involvement with others like a thorn. So on one level it means, he comes to live alone by the forest. But on a deeper level it means he doesn't get drawn into othering. He separates. There's a softening, a melting away of othering. And then Vasan shunyagare yadi satatame ko biramate. Dwelling in an empty place, if he loves ever to be one. So ostensibly that means he lives in a deserted spot and loves to be alone. But on a deeper level, of course, it suggests he's abiding in emptiness. And like an Alexander head of training at a busy Alexander school can still abide in emptiness, even though it's very busy. And Eko Biramate, he loves ever to be one. Wouldn't mean in that context being alone, but it would include the meaning of staying back in one's own back, keeping one's own integrity, not being drawn into end gaining, not being divided into subject and object, being one with one's action, with one's task, with one's work. So Viharati Kirti Shanta Hridaya. Shanta Hridaya, that means the mind is at peace, or the mind is softened, or the heart is softened. Shanta Hridaya, the heart is melted. That's literal too. Shanta Hridaya, the heart is melted. Viharati, he goes well, he fares well, like a monk in a vihara. Viharati, he fares well. Kirti, a man of action. Shanta Hridaya, his heart at peace. So that could describe somebody, an Alexander head of training, on an Alexander training school. I think of Ron Collier, who was always laughing resonantly and heartily on the training course when I was there. So so the verses in Canto 14 are related ostensibly with Shoyoku Chisoku Gyojaku Jo in Japanese. Shoyoku Alpechu, wanting little. Chisoku, knowing satisfaction. Santushti. And Gyojaku Jo, enjoying peace and quiet, is Praviveka, seclusion, separateness. But the separateness doesn't, on a deeper level, the separateness is letting the back lengthen and widen. You're not all congested. The ribs float apart from each other, all in the direction of Shantaye, growth, release. And knees forwards and away is a separation, so the pelvis is not pulling the legs in, but it's allowing a separation of the legs out. So one thing leads to another. And when I'm sitting in the morning, as I go through, I recite words that I found useful to remind myself of the 8 thoughts related to knees forwards and away. And I can sit there. It might not be very traditional practice of samadhi, in which the point of samadhi is not to be disturbed by thoughts. Let the water be still. And Asvaghosha describes thoughts as like ripples on calm water. So there should be an aspect of sitting in the morning where one's just there, enjoying the stillness, and that's included in samadhi as one of the 8 thoughts. But be that as it may, what I enjoy doing is dwelling on the 8 thoughts, one after the other, and let's say the 4 kinds of clinging, another thing to go around. Clinging to love, desire, clinging to views or a view, clinging to a story of oneself, and then clinging to virtue and vows, the 4 kinds of clinging. And those 4 kinds of clinging, one could come back to them at any stage, really, of thinking the 8 thoughts. If you're thinking about praviveka, separateness is the opposite of clinging. If we're thinking about prajna, I usually say embodied transcendent prajna of not clinging. So the Buddha said, anupadaya chitam asavehi vimutan, freeing the mind from the pollutants, from the taints, anupadaya, by not clinging. So not clinging, the whole thing is about not clinging. So this is included, I'm suggesting, in the gold mining metaphor. Shamayati mana samkshipati cha. He causes the mind to melt and then collects it, like the goldsmith who yatagnahu karmara pachati brishama vartayati cha, like the goldsmith in the fire or at the furnace, he melts it, pachati brisham avartayati cha, and then over and over again he turns it over. So these are the words in English that I recite to remind myself of the 8 thoughts, not as an abstract thing, but very much related with letting the neck be free to let the head go forward and up, letting the spine lengthen and the back widen, sending the knees forwards and away. So that separation of the upper body, which is coming up from the zafu, and the legs, which are out of the way. You see, the legs are such muscular things, the biggest muscles in the body there, in the gluteals and so on. But in the iliopsoas, especially the hip flexors, if they're retaining any kind of tension, that pull the back out of whack. So knees forwards and away is really about coming back into one's back, like those Bodhidharma dolls you see in China and Japan, you know, everything in one piece. Now, if the knees aren't going away, you haven't got that freedom in the hips, which allows everything to kind of grow, to lengthen and widen. So this is what happens as I go through the 8 thoughts. One thought leads to another, but the skeleton of it are these words which I'm just going to recite now without any interruption. Let's see what happens in a friendly way. Just sending the knees forwards and away. Knees forwards and away, like asking one's best friend. Not much. I'll pet you. Knees forwards and away. A sense of being content to stay back in one's own back, letting a separation happen. Samtushti praviveka. Knees forwards and away. Nothing more than a wish, but a persistent one, virya, that won't take no for an answer. Knees forwards and away. Smriti, thinking, but not as people understand thinking. Non-thinking, hishiryo, non-thinking. Kind thinking, as a letting happen. Remembering, smriti, remembering what we want to happen. Samadhi, prajna, prapanchopashama. Remembering what we want to happen. Knees forwards and away, towards enjoying the sovereignty of golden sitting in samadhi. Knees forwards and away. Embodied, transcendent wisdom of not clinging. Knees forwards and away. Nishprapancha. Towards the melting away of othering. So if I allow myself to just freely associate with that as a skeleton, knees forwards and away, well, start off, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Doesn't sound like anything, but that word happens is a very important word. Let's see what happens. So the beginning and the end, really, they're just like one joined up circle. Because the more clearly we understand the teaching of Nishprapancha, the melting away of othering, then the more we're interested not in achieving objects, but in what's happening now. Nagarjuna used the word gamyamana, the now being visited. That's what's important in Nagarjuna's teaching, gamyamana. In English, what's happening now is pretty close, but the genius of it is the now being visited could be this that's being visited by everything else, and it could be everything else that's being visited by this. So implicit in that phrase gamyamana is no separation inherently between subject and object. You see, recently I've seen there's a photo on YouTube. If you look at Christmas Humphreys, if you look for Christmas Humphreys Buddhism on YouTube, it comes up with a photo of three stooges of the British establishment: Alan Watts, D.T. Suzuki, and Christmas Humphreys, all of whom wrote books about Zen, which have elements that are very close to Zen in them and old Zen stories. But basically, if you sum them up in 2 words, it will be Zen realism. And Zen realism sounds very, very much like what the Buddha taught. But when you bite into it, it's like chalk versus cheese. They look the same. A cake of chalk looks like a cake of cheese. But when you bite into it, if I say, we are living in reality, it sounds like what the Buddha taught. Like Nagarjuna talks about tattva darshanat, navidvan tattva darshanat. The wise one is not the doer, tattva darshanat, because of seeing reality, because of seeing tattva. That's what it seems to mean. So Nagarjuna seems to be a Zen realist until you understand that tattva darshana can also mean tattva, reality, realizes itself because of reality realizing. Tattva darshana. Darshanat is ablative. So because of darshana, because of meeting, because of realizing, tattva, reality. So the reason, if I'm not the doer, it's not so much that I see reality, because that is a fundamentally dualistic proposition. I see reality. I, the subject, make contact with the object. It's a fundamentally dualist starting point. The subject and object, and somehow we have to make an effort to connect them. But what Nagarjuna is saying and what the Buddha is saying is vasanatmarama, dwelling in enjoyment of oneself. Because the forest is not separate from me. That's a much vasan shunyagare, dwelling in an empty place. See, what Asvaghosha is suggesting with his poetry is a situation that was never separated in the first place. See, it's a British imperial tactic, really, divide and rule. Create a division, and then the solution is the British colonial administrators come in and sort of, establish peace. The Pax Britannica. It's profoundly, once you start looking for the philosophical basis for a lot of evil that's been happening in the world conspicuously over the last few years, you can trace it back to British empiricism, realism, trusting the science and so on. It's a profoundly dualistic starting point. And so you follow people who talk about complexity, but it's all part of the psyop. see, complex reality is still separating reality. You have to study it empirically. That's the essence of realism, you see. And that's why I see that Alan Watts, D.T. Suzuki, Christmas Humphreys, they were all servants of that kind of realism. And that realism deeply infiltrated into even Zen in Japan. How do you think Japan got drawn into building an empire and fighting in the Second World War? Manipulated by realists. So this is very difficult to understand, but that's what the 8 thoughts are leading to. Nishprapancha, not othering, in the end, not othering reality. And that is what Nishijima Roshi did, my Zen teacher. He othered reality. He put reality on a pedestal. He thought light of the abstract and revered the concrete. I had a conversation with Mike Latchford before Mike went on his canoeing trip, dwelling in an empty place and loving ever to be one. Speaking of that, I mean, good for him. And Mike referred back to if you Google Mike Latchford, he Googled his name because he got a warning, some security warning from his old work. So he Googled his name, something which I would never venture to do for fear of depressing myself. And he got directed to the No Dogen Sangha blog, where Nishijima Roshi kind of responded to Mike's complaint, kind of thing. And that's where when I went back and read it again, I said basically he's othering reality. He's talking about the concrete, not the abstract. You see, it's the same thing. It's the object, not the subject. The concrete, not the abstract. It's favouring the other at the expense of the self, which actually, see, it's so difficult because Nagarjuna, the opening verse of MMK, chapter 17, I think it is, it says, Atma samyamakam cheta paranugrahakam chayat maitram sadharmas tadbijam palasya pretya chehacha. Atma samyamakam cheta, the mind of a friend, maitrim, the mind of a friend to control oneself, and paranugraham, to favour the other. That is the Dharma, and that is the seed of fruit. We're talking about growth, palam, the fruit. That's what we want. We want to attain the fruit of ultimately the fruit of the arhat is what we're working towards. The one who deserves to be served. The fourth of the four fruits. So the mind to restrain or control oneself and to favour the other, that is the Dharma itself. That is the teaching. That is what sustains and nourishes Dharma. It's the seed of fruit, pretya, hereafter, ihacha, and here and now. So it sounds like it's favouring the other at the expense of the self, which it is. But if I'm doing this talk now for others, but because I want to. There's no. It's not. It's a subtle thing, but it's not. There's no separation implied between self and others. And Nishijima Roshi's attitude when he wrote that thing to Mike Latchford, he's like, when I complained bitterly that he'd gone ahead and made changes in our Shobogenzo translation, not respecting the principle of the mutual veto, which was very hurtful. You see, I felt the harm of it very deeply. It was a hurtful thing to do. I had no doubt about that. When I asked him, "Why did you do that? Why didn't you just ask me? Why didn't you consult me?" He said, "I took the decision as a businessman in the modern age." Well, a businessman in the modern age is basically a British empiricist realist, a believer in globocap realism. So Nishijima Sensei thought that was what the Buddha taught, and that's what Nagarjuna upheld. What Nagarjuna is saying in that verse sounds similar to that, but it's not the same. It's not the same. It's not the realistic thing of you've got to crack a few eggs to make an omelette. So that Sensei sometimes would do that. He didn't like what amae kangae, soft thinking. You know, as a member of Japan's ruling elite, the Ministry of Finance, it was about making tough decisions. You know, it was like, I understand that's how people from King Edward School, Birmingham, were trained to think. Like colonial administrators couldn't be soft. In the end, you had to be realistic. So, back in 2007, 2008, I was going around every night, unable to sleep, going around the 8 thoughts of a great person. They're Master Dogen's, the final verse of the 95 edition of Shobogenzo. And the translations are all fine into Chinese. Shoyoku Chisoku, Gyojaku Jo, Gon Shojin, Fubonen, Shuzenjo, Shuchie. If I do those literally, Shoyoku, small desire. Chisoku, knowing satisfaction. Gyojaku Jo, enjoying peace and quiet. Gon Shojin, making effort, persevering. As in Shojin Ryori. Fubonen, not losing thinking, remembering. Shuzenjo, cultivating Zen balance. That's samadhi. Cultivating Zen stillness, you could say. Samadhi. Shuchie, cultivating wisdom. Perfect. Then Fukeron. What does that mean? Not fu, keiron. Kei means like playful or trivial. Ron means discussion. So no idle discussion. That doesn't give any idea about Nishprapancha. Not in the sense that Nagarjuna clarifies Nishprapancha. Prapanchopashamam, the melting away of othering. So just no idle discussion, not philosophizing, not making things up. It's in the general ballpark, but it doesn't. I couldn't understand what the eighth thought of the eighth of the eighth thought was. I could not understand it. So when I got E.H. Johnson's translation of Buddha Charita, I read through it, I went to the chapter which described the Buddha's death, and expecting to find a record of the 8 thoughts there, and sure enough it was there, but unfortunately not in Sanskrit. Only E.H. Johnson's rendering from the Tibetan mainly, with somewhat reference to the Chinese. So I understood Nishprapancha. You see, even with a Sanskrit dictionary, if you look at prapancha, it'll say something like elaboration, proliferation. But what Nishprapancha really means, that's what MMK is all about. That's why the dedicatory verses say, Ya pratitya samutpadam prapanchopa mamam shivam deshayamasa samburas tam vande vadatam varam. I praise him, the best of speakers, who taught pratitya samutpadam, the dependently arisen shivam, happiness, well-being, of prapanchopashamam, the melting away of othering. There it is. So when we understand that the melting away of othering, that's the antidote to realism. Yes, the will to the truth is the will to help others, and seclusion is avoiding others like a thorn. But to really understand those two teachings in MMK and in Saundarananda, ultimately they get really understood in light of the eighth of the eight thoughts, which is melting away of othering. So I haven't got very far. Let's see what happens in a friendly way. Let's see what happens. I've described. See, I could spend hours and hours just. That's what the whole of MMK is about. You see, seeing what happens, not what is, not the reality as it is. It's seeing what's happened. Seeing what happens, what's happening as happening. That's what the Buddha said in Pali, Yata Bhuta. People translate it seeing it as it is, or seeing it accurately. No, it means seeing it as happening. That's in light of prapanchopashamam, the melting away of othering. It's not about seeing this cup as it is. This cup is happening. So let's see what happens. You see, it doesn't sound like anything. It sounds like an innocent starting point, but it's all eight thoughts are included in that phrase. Let's see what happens, because it includes the wisdom of prapanchopashamam, the melting away of othering, in a friendly way, because we're interested in growth here. Here in this greenhouse, we're interested in growth. And metam rahula bhavanam bhavehi. Cultivate rahula, the cultivating, the friendly practice of cultivating. Metam bhavanam, the friendly practice of cultivating. Because we're not aggressively pursuing a separate object. Endgaining is an unfriendly, aggressive approach. So, metam. Let's see what happens in a friendly way. Again, that friendliness has to do with prapanchopashamam, the melting away of othering. Because if the other thing is separate, we're going to crack a few eggs. We don't care. We're going to crack a few eggs because the object of making the omelette is the important thing. Let's see what happens in a friendly way, sending the knees forwards and away. So the reason I like to start with that is it just brings it back to something very, very practical. Knees forwards and away is the most practical direction. Like Marjorie Barlow was asked she had two children while working as an Alexander teacher, and so one of the teachers she taught asked Marjorie's advice on how do you cope, as a young mother, continuing to teach the Alexander technique, keeping your Alexander practice up. And Marjorie told her, you spend your life in monkey. What she meant by that is, if you're doing the washing up or changing the baby's nappy, whatever you're doing, if you're on your feet all day, you're sending your knees forwards and away in what Alexander teachers kind of, for short, call the monkey position, with your knees bent, sending your knees forwards and away. So your back is like a big gorilla's, big silverback gorilla's back. You see, if you don't send your knees forwards and away, like you see a young mother would hold a baby on a hip often, with the pelvis sort of thrust to one side and forward. That would be the kind of habit that would give a young mum backache. So the monkey position is Alexander called it a position of mechanical advantage, but it's advantageous to sending your knees forwards and away. So it's a very practical thing. Let's see what happens in a friendly way, sending the knees forwards and away. Knees forwards and away, like asking one's best friend. Not much. So one's best friend is there in the gold mining metaphor, the first verse of the gold mining metaphor, and so is not much, because kramena dbi shudam, little by little, kramena, step by step, little by little, adbi, by the waters, shudam, washed. So the gold is washed, separated from the dirt, pamsu vyavahidam, kramena, little by little, by the waters, washed by the waters. So that more and more, that first thought, wanting little, it's there in the gold mining metaphor, because we separate the mind from harm. It isn't just like that. It's little by little. It's a humble, gradual, incremental approach. So, asking one's best friend includes, it's like no mud, no lotus. Mud is not our enemy. You can, whatever shitty thing happens, you can use it to make compost. So, if we're in the business of growth, anything organic is useful. And so in the gold mining metaphor, the dirt is not the dirt washer's enemy. No, on the contrary. A real good dirt washer, his life would be boring if all he did was find nuggets of gold lying in the riverbed. No, what he's good at is gradually washing the dirt away. So the gold is his friend, but equally the dirt is his friend. And for the goldsmith, of course, the fire, which is a source of suffering, is what allows the gold to melt and become workable. So what's our best friend? What's been my best friend over these last 40 years? 3 episodes of having aching pain in the stomach, because every one of those episodes was teaching me how clinging is suffering. Clinging to love, karma upadana, is suffering. If you understand that clinging to love is suffering, then it's easy to let go of the hot skillet. And the second thing was clinging to a view. And that relates to the realism I was talking about before. Nishijima Roshi's view was realism. But when it came to his attitude to good posture, I realised from the Alexander work that his view, I had to let go of it. His view was a view of doing, of intervention, top-down intervention, like the Ministry of Finance Mandarin, who's guiding Japanese society from above. That's what he was all about, seeing reality as it is and making the tough decisions, like, come up, that kind of big intervention. Now, that he didn't have evil intention. He just had a wrong view that he was clinging to, and when I drew his attention to it, he doubled down in the end. He doubled down because he couldn't lose his position. You see, he couldn't lose face. He was a realist. So that happened to me when I was 34. Clinging to a view became very painful. And then as soon as I met the Alexander work, I just let go of it straight away. Came back and trained in the Alexander technique. So that fire in my stomach, it's exactly as Asfagausa describes in the gold mining metaphor. It melted. My mind melted. The fire in the stomach caused something to soften. Not that I even now still totally let go of the view, but something softened enough so that I could grow in terms of leaving Japan and training as an Alexander teacher. So it's important to be humble about these things, because it's not that I went through these 3 phases of clinging and then stopped clinging. It's like Tistat Yanushayas Tesham Chanogniri Vabasmana Sate Bhavanaya Saumya Prashamyogniri Vambuna. That's the verse that Michael actually put on the back cover of the recent edition of Asfagausa's Gold. The underlying tendency behind those desires, persists like fire, like ash, like fire covered over with ash. You, my friend, it is for you, my friend, to extinguish it. Bhavanaya, using bhavana, using the practice of letting happen, using the practice of cultivating growth, cultivating. As if putting out a fire with water. So those underlying clingings persist in me. But having said that, something melted. My clinging to my teacher's view melted when I was 34. Thanks to this pain, this fire in the stomach. And then when I was 48, Atmavadopadana, clinging to a story of myself in which I was Nishijima Roshi's true successor, top of the class, number 1, as I was at primary school. That story of myself have to be the best, the number 1. The letting go of that clinging and seeking clearer water further upstream by studying Sanskrit was the same thing. It wasn't I let go and then I could start the new phase. No, the starting the new phase, studying Sanskrit in earnest, was the letting go of clinging to an old story of myself. Again, it was many sleepless nights with this pain in the stomach. So, like Marjorie Barlow said, being wrong is the best friend you've got in this work. So that's very vividly real for me if I think about those 3 episodes, which is the 3 kinds of clinging caused this pain in the stomach, which turned out to be my best friend, this fire in the stomach. Because, excuse me, like the gold miner, like the goldsmith, he needs the fire to melt the gold. I needed the pain in the stomach to let go of the clinging. And then that's 3 out of 4 kinds of clinging. And the 4th one is clinging shilavrato-padana, clinging to virtue and vows of practice. So I'm not discounting the possibility that I might have another episode of pain in the stomach, but hopefully my conscious mind will be quickened to the extent of noticing what's happening. So, knees forwards and away, like asking one's best friend, not much. In the gold mining metaphor, the fire can be your best friend. The dirt can be your best friend. And of course, the water. Kramena Shudam. The dirt is washed in the end by the water. And that might be the water of grace. Like asking one's best friend. Perhaps it should be plural, like asking one's best friends. The water, the fire, the dirt. Not much, I'll pitch you. Knees forwards and away, a sense of being content. Samtushti, tushti, that word appears in the Shikarini verses several times. Shamasukha rasajna, a knower of the nectar of Shama, peace, and Sukha, ease. And then in Canto 16, if you don't make effort, Shruti Niyama Tushti Vyuparamo, the breakdown of learning, Shruti Niyama, restraint, Tushti, satisfaction, contentment. So the Tushti is the second of the 8 thoughts. Virya is the 4th, but they're all contained in each other, you see. It's making effort. It's making effort where contentment lies. Lying in bed all day wouldn't produce contentment. The contentment is in making the effort. Then praviveka, separateness, we've discussed already. Pravivikta is part of the means whereby knees forwards and away is a separation. So sending the knees forwards and away is part of the means whereby. But then there's another verse in Saundarananda where the Buddha describes to Nanda Shila Samadhi Prajna Triskandam etam pravigaya margam praspashtam ashtangam aharyam aharyam dukasya hetun prajahati doshan prapnoti chatyanta shivam padam tat. So devoting oneself to this threefold path, this straightforward, 8-branched, irremovable, noble path. One abandons the faults which are the causes of suffering. One abandons the harms, doshan. One abandons the harms, the clinging, the 4 kinds of clinging especially. One abandons those causes of suffering. Prapnoti chatyanta shivam. Prapnoti chatyanta shivam padam tat. And one attains that inner well-being state, padam, step. One takes the step which is excessively happy. Ashyopachare dirti rajavamcha. So attendant on it, attendant on that path or on that step. Ashyopachare dirti, grit. I think dirty sounds like grease, doesn't it? It means that. Steadfastness, but in a word, grit. Dirti arjavam, uprightness. Dirti arjavam cha. Hrir, humility. Apramadaha, attentiveness. Praviviktata cha, and separateness, seclusion. So seclusion, separateness is part of the means whereby, but it's also attendant on that state of excessive happiness. You say it's the means and it's also the end. Pravivikta. It's interesting because he's describing the ultimate happiness, but it kind of comes back again to this separateness. Nothing kind of grand, not a vision of somebody on a throne, surrounded by worshipping multitudes. No, attendant on this attaining of the path, realizing the path. Separateness, seclusion. And then he says, Alpechata tushtir. So, alpechata, wanting little, tushtir, contentment. See, so they're the beginning of the 8 thoughts of a great person. They're part of the practical means whereby they're also like adornments, the adornments of the realized condition. Alpechata tushtir asamgata cha. So whenever I hear that word asamgata, it makes me think of the word unclubbable. F.M. Alexander, they say, was an unclubbable man, He wasn't a mover and shaker in his local Masonic lodge. Asamgata means... So samga means a community, a club, a congregation. Asamgata means the opposite of that, not somebody who's clubbable, who likes to congregate. Again, it suggests separateness is not only the means, but it's also the end. And then loka pravritavarati kshama cha. No fondness for going out into the world. So again, a sense of when we get where we're supposed to be going, we shouldn't think that it's, our follow count should go up to several million and so on. No, that's more reserved for servants of the empire. And then finally, kshama cha. See, kshama is cognate with the earth. So it means tolerance. Interestingly, patience. So this ultimate golden sovereignty is not what we might have thought it would be like. It's more kind of humble, patience, tolerance, separateness, seclusion, not mixing, no fondness for worldly activity. Knees forwards and away, nothing more than a wish. Sending these forwards and away is a very strong thing, and you feel it after a while. I've been sitting now for an hour, and I feel it. it's kind of an energy, a power. The more you think knees forwards and away, you feel a strength from it. But it's not a doing. It's just a thinking. That's because it's a release. You can't do an undoing. It's an undoing. Nothing more than a wish, but a persistent one that won't take no for an answer. Virya. See, in the verses on Virya in Shikarini Meet at the end of Canto 16, again, that wisdom is there in Upashantim. Griham Tyaktva Muktau Yadayam Upashantim Nalabate. If he leaves home, but in that freedom, finds no upashantim, finds no softening, finds no undoing, finds no release, finds no peace. The effort, the kind of effort we want is shantaye, in the direction of undoing, releasing, softening. There's an irony there. Sending your knees forwards and away, it gives you a power. It gives you a power of separateness, staying back in your own back is the Alexander jargon. But it's not in the direction of being hard or rigid. It's shantaye, in the direction of softening. But virya means persisting, being resolute, being virile. Knees forwards and away. Nothing more than a wish. It's not a hard doing, just a wish. Knees, I wish to release. I wish my legs to be separate. Especially the iliopsoas muscles, to be free of tension. Knees forwards and away, smriti, thinking, but not as people understand thinking. Non-thinking, hishiryo in Chinese. Hishiryo doesn't mean different from thinking. For me, hishiryo doesn't mean different from thinking. It means thinking. In the same way that hibutsu doesn't mean someone who's different from Buddha. It means a Buddha who's different, hibutsu. So a non-Buddha. Hibutsu means non-Buddha. A Buddha who doesn't look necessarily like a Buddha. Doesn't necessarily sound like a Buddha. What people think a Buddha looks and sounds like, it doesn't necessarily conform to that. Hibutsu. And hishiryo means thinking. Not what people denigrate as intellectual thinking. You know, in Japanese, rikutsuya-san, you are a purveyor of logic. You know, that's the worst thing, insult in Zen. Master Renpo Niwa, Jima Roshi's teacher, his personal motto was Moji Zen, the Zen of sentences and letters. He liked calligraphy, but at the same time there's a kind of confidence there that he wasn't worried about appearing to be, you know, not the real thing. People who are the real thing don't tend to care too much about appearing as if they're the real thing. So non-thinking is thinking. Knees forwards and away is thinking, not doing. Alexander said, none of you knows how to think. It's an exercise in learning what thinking is. Remembering. So smriti is from the verbal root smri, which means remembering. That is most literal meaning. So it's thinking in the sense of remembering what you want to happen, knees forwards and away, remembering what you want to happen. Not remembering what it feels like. It feels good, you know, but the feeling comes after. Remembering what the thought is, what kind of a thinking it is, what kind of a wishing it is. Remembering that, and then the feeling, the kind of confirmatory feeling, comes later. Remembering what you want to happen. So that remembering, samkshipati cha, it's like he collects the mind, like collecting the gold. It's like similar thing. The mind is separated from harm, like the gold is separated from dirt. And then the mind is melted, like the gold being melted in the furnace. And then it's collected. And so that's kind of remembering what you want. What we want to happen is a kind of a collecting. Samadhi means putting together. A putting together. Asvaghosha speaks of aikagryam, one-pointedness. The one-pointed mind. So not being scattered, being concentrated. Having said that, beware the devil that is concentration. It's not concentration like as an effort, a narrowing focus kind of concentration. Remembering what you want to happen. Samadhi, prajna, nishprapansha. Number 6, 7, 8. Smriti is number 5, remembering. Knees forwards and away towards enjoying the sovereignty of golden sitting in samadhi. Golden sitting in samadhi. Knees forwards and away. Embodied transcendent wisdom of not clinging. Embodied transcendent prajna of not clinging. So this relates with particularly the final verse of Canto 15, abandoning ideas. Having collected the mind, having collected the gold, turned it over, the goldsmith, he enjoys his freedom to guide the melted gold into various beautiful designs, so that in the same way the bhikkhu of cleansed mind, or mind cleansed, the mind cleansed bhikkhu, which could mean his mind is clear, but also it could mean that he's clear of a non-empty conception of mind. Because shamayati mana, he's dropped off. Vishodya kleshebhya shamayati mana. He's caused to melt away the mind as the object to be cleansed. And this rain is possibly a sign that I should, rather than fight against the sound of it, prapanshopashama, knees forwards and away, nishprapansha, towards the melting away of othering, towards the melting away of pursuing objects. Anirodham anutpadam anuchedam ashashvatam anikartam ananartam anagamam anirgamam. Ya pratitya samutpadam prapancho pashamam shivam deshayamasa sambuddhas tam vande vadatam varam. Let's see what happens. Let's turn back from othering and let happiness be. What's happening? Anirodham anutpadam. What's happening? Anirodham. Beyond stopping. Anutpadam. Beyond starting, beyond arising. Anuchedam ashashvatam. Beyond being cut. Beyond annihilation. Ashashvatam. Beyond continuing. Beyond eternity. Because it's happening. So no starting point, no end point. It's just happening dependent on everything else that's happening. And for the same reason, anekartam ananartam. Not oneness, not differentiation. Because it's happening. What's happening can't be separated. Can't be separated into many things. And it can't be conglomerated into one happening. Anekartam ananartam. He's just simply talking about what's happening, not the reality of what is, but the truth of what's happening. Anagamam anirgamam. Not going away, not coming here. It's the same thing. What's happening is not A moving through B. It's not B moving through A. It's A and B being empty of themselves and full of each other. So you can't say that one thing's going hither and another thing's coming thither. Coming hither and going thither. Beyond that. Ya pratitya samutpadam prapancho pashamam shivam deshayamasa sambuddhas tam vande vadatam varam. Ya, who, he who, pratitya samutpadam, dependently arisen, or samutpadam, arising or happening, samutpadam, pratitya, by going back, arising now by going back, happening now because of what's happened already, happening now because of everything else that's happening, dependent, pratitya, going back to dependent, happening integrally. Sam means together, happening together, springing up together, pratitya, dependent on everything else that's happening. Ya pratitya samutpadam prapancho pashamam, the melting away of othering, shivam, happiness, the bliss of dependently arisen, melting away of othering. So this melting away of othering doesn't happen as a sort of a singular phenomena unto itself. It happens as a result of going round and round and round. Like I once heard Ajahn Sumedho describe, he said the Buddha's teaching is like a clinical religion. All these lists, enumerated lists, and I think that's true. You keep coming back to the 5 powers, the 5 strengths, the 8 branches of the Rightfold Path, the 4 kinds of right effort, the 4 kinds of clinging, the 8 thoughts of a great person. Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, the three baskets, and so on it goes. So, dependent on all those teachings, there's Prapanchopashamam Shivam, the dependently arisen happiness of melting away of othering, that melting away, Shantaye. It's in that direction that we make an effort. Tadviryam Kuru Shantaye. So make an effort in the direction of melting, in the direction of melting away of othering. Vinyatam viryehi. For in effort, virye. Vinyatam, assuredly, no doubt about this. Sarvadaya, all kinds of growth. The growth we want is in the effort. And this is Nagarjuna's song of praise to the Buddha. And realizing that that's true. Ya pratitya samutpadam prapanchopashamam shivam deshayamasa. He taught Sambuddhas, the fully awakened one, the Sambuddha, the fully awakened Sambuddha. He's teaching. Tam vande vadatam varam. Vande, I praise. Tam, him. Vadatam, of speakers. Varam, the best. I praise him, the best of speakers.